that I'm experiencing in my current work at Peel Youth Services is that I'm talking to the family worker, and what she's discovering is a phenomenon that there are boys that are becoming really highly aggressive in their adolescence, and it's unfortunate, but it seems to be linked to a lot of single mothers' sort of homes. It happens in married homes, but unfortunately, it seems to be this degree of higher in single parents' home. I'm just gotta be careful what I say. I don't, bag mum out completely. It's not what I'm trying to do. But what's surprisingly is that because the boys have very little contact with their dads, that it's interesting, they're lacking empathy towards the primary caregiver in the home, so they're becoming violent, they're becoming abusive, they're destroying property, and mum's sort of trapped, like, what do I do with that information? But we'll probably talk a little bit about that a bit later on. So what Farrell's saying here is that we usually think of empathy as something that's transmitted by the mother. Thus, one of the most surprising findings about father involvement is that the amount of time a father spends with a child is one of the strongest predictors of empathy in adult. And it's probably true in some of the things that I've seen is that well-functioning families produce boys that have some sort of consideration for others. But it seems to be these single-parent families that seem to be lacking. These boys seem to be lacking this fundamental development in their life. Can you have the next slide, please? Can we have the next slide? Yep, okay. So Farrell links this to the way men discipline their children. So discipline is one of these really interesting words because what is the right appropriate form of discipline? So there's lots of schools of thoughts on that, and I'm deliberately going to avoid that at the moment. Farrell explains that both parents have boundaries with children, but it's the way men communicate and follow through with boundaries that Farrell believes is the primary indicator of empathy development in children. Farrell states the following. Next slide, please. When a child violates a boundary, mums tend to repeat her request, escalate the volume of it, and feel guilty about consequences, or not have promised any consequences to begin with. Dad is more likely to mention the consequence up front when the boundary is violated, exact the consequence as it was a done deal made between dad and the child. The usual outcome is the child's taking the father's boundary settings more seriously. And that seems to happen, what I notice quite a lot. Even as working in crisis residential work, these boys or these even daughters and girls, they come in, and they come in quite what we would consider quite feral, all over the place, swearing and really running amok. But when we slowly introduce boundaries to these young people, and when we, like the 1, 2, 3 rule, like if you break 3 times then you're going to be evicted and all that sort of stuff, it actually started changing their behavior because the boundaries are really, really clear and succinct. The discipline was that you potentially could lose your accommodation, or you'll lose out on some other activities like rec activities and things like that. And we sort of became the surrogate parent in a way for these kids, and they come in and then they have this massive boundary conflict with us, but eventually we start curtailing their behavior to a place where it's more manageable and they reap the benefits. And Farrell was sort of linking that some cases in some families that especially in the cases that I raised about the single mums and stuff, that these boys are getting away with stuff. And when I talk to these mums and I say to them, why don't you call the police, or why don't you put we've got over here what they call move-on notices for violent behaviour, or that sort of stuff here in Perth. And they say, well, why would I do that? He's my child. So there's this really emotional attachment to that, and naturally, and it's healthy and it's to be expected, but there needs to be obviously consequences for that behaviour, and consequences that mum at this particular time isn't quite prepared to go through with. So, but when I sit down and I teach her the importance of these boundaries, in particular with boys, they sort of get it, and they started feeling a little bit more empowered that they can actually make these decisions and get the right sort of boundaries in place, and the boy learns from the consequences of his actions. I'm hoping that's making sense. Yeah. So how does treating boundaries seriously create empathy? Teaching the child to treat boundaries seriously teaches the child to respect the rights and the needs of others. Thinking of another needs creates empathy. So that's the goal of putting a good...
Dropped out there for a moment.
Oh, sorry, guys.
Kevin, you're all right. You're all right. If you want to continue on from where you were about a minute ago, and I'm sure we do have a Q&A session at the end, and we'll put that to Kevin, that question.
Be nice, please.
No, it is. It's an easy one for you anyway.
I hope so. So I guess I'll just reiterating that, how does treating boundaries seriously create empathy? Teaching the child to treat boundaries seriously teaches the child to respect the rights and the needs of others. Thinking of another's needs creates empathy. And I think the boundaries and the discipline do need to be healthy ones, and they do need to be safe ones. Like I said, I'm sort of avoiding the conversation around discipline because I know that it strikes a very strong chord in some people, and it's not my job to tell you what's safe and what's not safe, but I sort of just mentioned that it just needs to be reasonable and it needs to be safe for the child. Yep. Okay, next slide, please. Students coming from father-present families score higher in maths and science even when they come from weaker schools. First grade black and white children from both sexes raised in father-absent families recorded significantly lower IQ scores than those with father's presence. Now, given that this is Farrell's work, so you just Google Warren Farrell, and that would be a bit more credence to the research if you're that way inclined. But it is based on United States stuff. But I think it's still relevant for the work that we do here in Australia. So children living without dads were more likely to be absent from school and to have more suspensions and more expulsions and a higher rate of truancy. Now, I've done a lot of work in schools in the last couple of years. I've been a counsellor for self-harm and suicide in schools in 2011 and 2012. I've done some outreach work in schools as a counsellor with Peel Youth Services. And I have to say that last statement is pretty much on the money in my experience, that when I talk to boys or girls coming from single-parent homes, it just seems to be that their schooling is not that important. What seems to be important for these young people is to get out and find ways to, one, make money and to find a better life than what they're living in, I guess, in a summary sort of sense. Okay, so next slide. So it says here in the psychological factor that the more the father's involved, the more easy the child makes open, receptive, and trusting contact with new people in his or her life. And I just think that just demonstrates that, there are good men in the community, and not all men are, are nasty little critters. And so I guess that when the child learns that, dad's involved, dad teaches certain aspects, it just helps for the child to realize that, you can talk to other people and it's okay. 80% of preschool children admitted as psychiatric patients into 2 New Orleans hospitals come from homes without fathers. Similar percentages emerged from countries diverse as Canada, South Africa, and Finland at ages from preschool through to teenagers. Now, if it was just the state stuff, I would go, yeah, it's American. But because Canada and Finland are very similar to Australian in how we approach working with young people, and in particular children, it raises alarms that, if Canada and Finland are experiencing these sort of significant outcomes, then it'll be interesting to find out. And in my research and probably a little bit of work that I'll do in the future, I probably would go into this. But it's interesting that first world countries are experiencing these sort of phenomena. If dad's not home, then there seems to be this psychic sort of breakdown with the children or even teenagers. Next slide, please. So physical development. So we all probably heard of Maggie Hamilton. She's quite a prolific sort of person in the field of raising boys and her work and stuff. So she explains that why dads are important in this period of a time for boys. So she's talking about puberty and transitioning into men. It's a big journey from boyhood to adult life, and like mums and dads have much to contribute. For a boy, a close relationship with his father is like gold. She quotes boy Toby at 16 years. Boys need their dad's strength, comfort, and guidance and protection. The boys I spoke with are in no doubt how much their dad meant. Having a father around means his presence empowers you and gives you something to strive for. So it doesn't matter if dad, like if you use the motorbike analogy, if dad's a BMW 1100 road bike and he can soar through the traffic and over roads, or whether he's a Vespa scooter 50cc, it doesn't matter. Just the fact that dad's presence is around and dad's active and involved and he's there in the family sort of allows these boys to feel strength, to feel power, to feel the very things that they need, and to understand their own masculinity. Can we have the next slide, please? If you don't have this, you don't know how to act except from your friends. Without your dad, it's hard to know about your body and a whole lot of things. Tom 12 agrees. if a father lives with his son and is strong, he's like an anchor, one consistent who models what they become. So one really important lesson that I've learnt in my time in the field is that boys, how am I going to say this, that boys will be what you teach them to be, is probably how I would say that. So if, for example, the home is full of domestic violence, or if the home is full of abuse of some kind or another, then the boy learns that that's okay. So we need to be governed and geared by the perpetrator of all that. And it's generally, unfortunately, the perpetrator is often the male present in the family, the old male, like dad, or the boyfriend, or the stepdad, and so forth. So boys will become what you teach them to be. So what Tom here is saying is that if that his dad is strong, that means if dad is able to make good decisions, put good boundaries, able to act in discipline, able to engage in the boy's behaviour and engage in the boy's strength, and then dad's like an anchor for that and sort of steers him and guides him and just puts him in one place long enough to learn and grow and develop. I hope that's clear. So go to the next slide, please. Boys also need their dads to help teach them about the world of men. Without this, it's very hard for boys to know who they are. Many of the boys felt for peers who didn't have contact with their dads. I have a few friends without dads, says Lyle 12. So it's the world of men's interesting because we don't think and behave like women, and so we obviously it's different. We all think differently, and I'm quite happy for that. And so what we need to understand is that when a boy heads into adolescence, when he hits this road, that it's no longer about being close to mum. He really wants to find answers about his own masculinity, his own development, his own sense of self. And often dad is the person, or in indigenous cultures, or I should say in some indigenous cultures, the uncle plays an important role then. The uncle comes in and he plays a part. But in my understanding, it's dad who would then become that person who would teach about puberty, who would teach the boy about the world of men, how we think, how we behave, why risk is important. Can we have the next slide, please? They miss their dads in most cases, miss their support. This is what Tyler experiences also. I think it's very sad for boys who don't have a dad around. They miss out on fun things like going to the movies, arcades, and shopping for stuff. Flynn 16 talked about how envious boys without a dad were good dads. And so I think it's important. I put that in there for a reason, because dads, we like to play. We like toys. We like to get out and about and tinker and do these things, and we like to get physical, and we like to go and do sports and all that sort of stuff in a very interesting way, and boys respond well to that. And it's interesting that the kid says that good dads, because there is a distinction between healthy dads and unhealthy dads. And so with the unhealthy dads, there might be alcoholics or absent from home or whatever the case may be, and it's about grabbing those dads and teaching them this stuff and how important they are for the lives of boys that they have responsibility for. Can I have the next slide, please?